A double car bombing kills 33 in Benghazi, Libya. A Kenyan film is nominated for an Oscar. And sci-fi type 3D holograms in advertising have arrived. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. We begin in Libya, where twin car bombings have killed at least 33 people in Benghazi and wounded dozens more. Now, the first car blew up outside a mosque in the Al Salmani neighborhood. The second bomb went off at the same spot about 30 minutes later. It's believed the second attack was intended to kill police and rescue workers. No one has claimed responsibility. The United Nations mission in Libya has condemned the bombings, saying attacks on civilians are a violation of international humanitarian law. Now, Benghazi has been at the center of 3 years of fierce fighting between extremists and forces loyal to Libyan military strongman Khalifa Haftar. Now, Haftar declared the city liberated last year, but Libya has been in chaos since dictator Muammar Gaddafi was toppled and killed in 2011. Now, Haftar heads a government based in eastern Libya, while an internationally recognized administration has been set up in the western capital of Tripoli. The Western government has struggled to assert its authority across the country. The uncertainty in Libya has opened the door for terror groups such as Islamic State to set up camps there. Now, the United Nations human rights chief is accusing Ethiopian security forces of opening fire on protesters who were singing anti-government songs. Ravina Shamdasani did not specify the source of the information, but says the UN's regional office in Addis Ababa has collected information from several sources, including local media, trusted civil society sources, and official statements. The incident came just 2 weeks after Ethiopia's ruling coalition, the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, announced its plans to roll out reforms. In its reaction, Ethiopian government spokesperson Negera Lencho said demands by the public should be raised peacefully. However, he called on security forces to exercise restraint and avoid actions that could lead to death and injury. Well, for more on the political situation in Ethiopia, Zedale Leman, editor-in-chief and founder of Addis Standard magazine, joins me live via Skype from just outside Frankfurt in Germany. Ms. Leman, welcome to Africa 54.
Thanks for having me, Vincent.
Not long ago, we talked about the hope that the Ethiopian government would kind of change its way of doing things. What do you make of this latest accusation by the UN?
First of all, I don't think it's only accusation because the statement is almost the same as the news story that we made on Sunday morning. It confirms that innocent civilians have been killed by security forces at a religious festival in Woldia in northern Ethiopia. So it's beyond accusation. Second of all, I think this is the way the Ethiopian security is programmed to function. So every time there is a small gathering, whether it's big or small, the response is very violent from the armed force of the country's security apparatus. Yeah. So it's in line with the way they have been handling public gatherings so far.
But a government spokesperson says, well, protesters, please conduct yourselves in a way that will not lead to death or injuries. What does he mean by this?
Well, it's. I think I would like the spokesperson to revisit his statement in this particular incident, because from every source that we have talked to, this was purely a religious gathering. This was one of the holiest events that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church followers do observe every year, once in a year, Epiphany. So the young people in town, after the ceremonies were coming to an end, the young people in town were singing and just having fun. And suddenly one of, at some point the songs have turned into an anti-government songs, which is very popular nowadays, related to the depleting popularity of the government in power. So this is what sets off the alarm for the security people. So the issue to discuss here is whether or not such fully armed security people should be patrolling religious events in a peaceful situation that preceded it.
So from all your sources, from all you know, these young people did not engage in any violent activity. They did not attack anybody. They were peacefully singing, chanting anti-government slogans, you say?
There were further interviews as well that were filed by other media organizations today by talking to the people, the families of the victims. One of the victims, for example, Gabriel Meskel, has been killed, according to his brother, in a place where there has not been any disturbance at all. His brother spoke to the media like that. And they have been singing, yes, so far, we have verified that there were songs of denouncing the government, but they were far from being violent. The security forces were just standing by alarmed of any public gathering. And I think that is the panic that sets off the killing.
Very quickly, when the UN speaks, of course, it's hoping that the government will stop using force against civilians, but also that somebody will be held accountable. What's your take on that?
Well, the UN says what the UN always says. This has been the trend for the last 27 years, ever since this government came to power. We have not seen a single government official, neither a security officer, held accountable for so many of the killings that have happened in the past. The UN always says that. It's not only the UN, but the Western donors that are cooperating with that government always come up with a statement of investigate this and investigate that. It doesn't happen. The way the political infrastructure is built in that country wouldn't make it possible for the government to hold its own officials accountable for killings like this.
Well, Ms. Lema, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Vincent.
All right. And now Sedale Lema. He's the editor-in-chief and founder, in fact, of the Addis Standard magazine. Now, all the way to Southern Africa. When he came to power, Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa promised to foster transparency and fight corruption. Now, he's given cabinet ministers and senior government officials until the end of next month to declare their assets. This means they will be required to disclose details on their real estate, the property valued above $100,000, and shareholdings in business by February the 28th. Under Mugabe's rule, few government officials were arrested for corruption. When the military announced it had put Mugabe under house arrest, it said it was targeting criminals that surround the former president. Since then, 3 former government ministers and allies of Mugabe have been arrested and charged in court for criminal abuse of office. The trio deny charges and say they are being persecuted for supporting Mugabe and his wife, Grace. Meanwhile, Mnangagwa is attending the World Economic Forum in Davos, where he's trying to lure foreign investment and end the country's international pariah status. He's promised to hold transparent elections by July and says he'll accept the results if the opposition wins. Now, South African anti-apartheid veteran and ex-wife of late President Nelson Mandela, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, has been hospitalized for a kidney infection. But she is expected to make a full recovery. Her spokesperson says Madikizela has complained of a loss of appetite and that one of her legs was painful. She was taken to Mill Park Hospital in Johannesburg. Madikizela Mandela has been in and out of hospital since 2016 for back and knee surgery. Her family says she's expected to make a full recovery and is likely to spend a week in hospital. Still there. In South Africa, South Africans and fans around the world are paying tribute to legendary jazz trumpeter and anti-apartheid activist Hugh Masekela. He died on Tuesday after a long battle with cancer. Among his most memorable music was the hit single Bring Him Back Home, a protest song Masekela wrote demanding the release of Nelson Mandela from prison. But Masekela recorded countless other solos and worked with big names in the music industry, including Senegal's Youssou N'Dour and American Paul Simon. VOA's Mariama Diallo looks back at Masekela's long career in music and political activism.
Jazz legend Hugh Masekela uplifted the soul of an entire nation through his timeless music. South African officials said on Tuesday after the passing of a man they called a one-of-a-kind musician. He's known for many hits, including Bring Back Nelson Mandela, a tribute to the former South African president.
But on my birthday in 1985, Nelson Mandela sent me a birthday letter actually, that was smuggled out of Portsmouth prison. And in it he just like encouraged us, you know, with the music school and with the recordings, and he knew everything. He knew my children's names, he knew my wife's name. Well, he's gone to school with my wife's father at University of Fort Hare. And he just wished me luck with all these things, but it was just a letter, and I was blown away. I went to the piano and I started singing Bring Back Nelson Mandela.
Many today are fondly remembering the legendary musician who they affectionately referred to as Bra Hugh.
He wasn't a musician who was too aware of his own greatness. You know, he was always open to sharing and to teaching. You know, that was for me one of his greatest gifts. You know, his ability to share what he knew, and his long, legendary achievements never got in the way of him looking at somebody who's starting out and saying, "What are you doing? How can I help?"
President Jacob Zuma praised the legendary trumpeter, cultural activist, and liberation struggle veteran as the one who kept the torch of freedom alive, globally fighting apartheid through his music. His family says he passed peacefully in Johannesburg after a courageous battle with prostate cancer. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
Well, back in Washington, the U.S. government is back at work following a brief shutdown of immigration. A divided Congress will once again attempt to address the situation of the so-called Dreamers. Those are young immigrants brought illegally into the U.S. by their parents. The issue motivates activists in both parties and could be a major factor in this year's midterm congressional elections. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone has more from Washington.
Thank you for hearing and answering our prayers.
With the Senate back in session, a prayer of thanks from Chaplain Barry Black after a brief government shutdown. Republicans believe they may have an advantage now in the negotiations over the status of the so-called Dreamers, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
This regrettable episode reminded all of us that in the United States Senate, brinksmanship and hostage-taking simply do not work.
President Trump proclaimed victory on Twitter and said he's ready to deal. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
He's going to play a big role in the process, but it's on Congress to get that legislation through the two bodies and hit the president's desk.
Trump may have strengthened his position, says analyst Zeke Miller.
So if the president is buoyed by this and he feels that that this is a win for him, despite the embarrassment of sort of the show of dysfunction in Washington, but that he came out on top.
Democrats vowed to fight hard for the Dreamers on Tuesday, including Senate Leader Chuck Schumer.
The Republican majority now has 16 days to work with us to write a bill that can get 60 votes and prevent the Dreamers from being deported. The clock is ticking. 16 days. That's not much time. Got to get moving.
Schumer also withdrew an earlier offer to agree to a substantial down payment on Trump's border wall, a key campaign promise by the president. Polls show support for protecting the Dreamers, and their fate could factor into this year's congressional elections, where Democrats are focused on Trump as the defining issue, says John Fortier.
Democrats are united in one thing, that they don't like Donald Trump and that they want to run against him and the Republican Party. And so there's motivation on that side that unites their party just in that.
Yet Trump supporters are also likely to be motivated, says analyst Joy Reid.
The number one issue among these Trump voters was immigration. Far more than anything else, immigration was mentioned as a negative impact on the country.
The end of the government shutdown means crisis averted for now. But another showdown is looming just weeks away if Congress and the president can't agree on a way forward for the Dreamers. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, here are the nominees. An African film with a shot at an Oscar. Stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
Nora Poihonen holds a glass filled with 70 crickets.
Our cricket bread, as sirkkaleipä as we call it, it's hand-baked artisan bread.
You heard that right, bread made out of crickets, which Poihonen, the marketing and portfolio director of Finland food company Fazer, says is the first company to sell insect bread.
The insects are ground, and they are baked there with the flour, so you don't really see or feel them at all in the bread.
She says some people drive 100 kilometers to buy a loaf at $4.75. Others, like shopper Mark Russell, are wary of insect bread, but he says
it tastes really good.
Insects are filled with vitamins, iron, and calcium, and the trend is catching on in Europe now in places like Britain, Denmark, and Belgium, selling insects to eat and food made with insects. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
Welcome back. Now, 2018 could again be Africa's year of the Oscars. A Kenyan film was being nominated in the Best Live Action Short Film category. Watu Wote, All of Us, is an account of the Al-Shabaab attack on a bus in which Muslims protected Christians traveling with them. Cast and crew members burst into celebration as news of the nominations came in. It is based on the true story of a 2015 attack by Somalia Al-Qaeda-linked group Al-Shabaab on a bus heading to Mandera from Garissa. The attack was foiled by Muslim passengers who refused to comply with attackers' demands to separate the Muslims from Christians. 3 people were killed in the attack, including one who shielded the Christians. Al-Shabaab militants shot at the bus, forcing the driver to stop, and boarded it. Their intention was to kill those not of their faith. Watu Wote, All of Us, is a joint German-Kenyan production. Now, the award-winning documentary Nowhere to Hide tells the story of a family in Iraq immediately after the coalition forces pulled out of the war. It documents the danger and displacement that followed the invasion by the Islamic State. VOA's Caroline Turner has more.
Nowhere to Hide documents a 5-year journey through the world's most dangerous combat zone, known as the Triangle of Death, located 100 miles north of Baghdad. The film follows Nouri Sharif, a medic in Jalala, immediately after coalition forces pulled out. He records his daily life as the power vacuum spirals from instability into a nightmare when the Islamic State invades.
It is difficult to diagnose this war. This is the car of a family in a crossfire on their way to Jawala yesterday. Their baby daughter got killed in the crossfire. I carried her in my arms to the hospital.
Filmmaker Zaradash Ahmed, who grew up in Iraq, explains why he made the film.
The thing about the film, it's a portrait of a real war, a portrait of people ending in a kind of war that they never been asking for, and they have to cope with it.
Fleeing their home, Sharif and his family become nomadic refugees in their own country.
Before, I was documenting other victims of war, but now I'm documenting myself. Mustafa, repeat after me. God, don't let the plane bomb us. Move faster. I am not comfortable here.
Dad, look.
What is it? Can I see it? A bullet. Oh, Sarah.
Over 5 years, the family takes refuge in 13 different locations before finding safe haven in a refugee camp.
All people talk about is the war and nothing but the war. Everybody talks about who died and who didn't, etc. That was the sound of the artillery I mentioned earlier as a witness in front of the camera.
Ahmed is surprised by American ignorance of the refugees' plight.
Both when it comes to the war-torn countries and also refugees. I got the feeling of demonizing, the demonizing process of refugees. It's very strong here, and also in Europe, but maybe a little bit different because here mostly they don't know what's going on, and lots of people don't know. America actually physically went 9 years in Iraq. They were there, and they caused also part of damage. They removed Saddam Hussein, okay, that's true, but also I feel like they didn't finish the job.
Who wants to take the camera and film? And keep your hands steady. Film that flag. It's the ISIS flag. The village is controlled by them.
Worldwide, there are this egoism in us. It's growing and growing. And you hear all the time about building walls. In 90s and early 90s and late 80s, it was a huge movement in the world to turn down all the walls. And then they tear down the Berlin Wall, which was a huge symbolizing that we are united, that we are connected together. Today is opposite of that.
We left our house. It was bombed from the air.
The filmmaker believes once viewers see the film, they will open their minds and ask, what can we do to make things better? Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, traditional billboards go sci-fi. We'll be right back.
In Libya, twin car bombings outside a mosque in Benghazi kill at least 35 and dozens are also wounded. The Gates Foundation announces a $45 million investment in nutrition and family planning programs in Burkina Faso. In Vatican City, the Pope appeals for peace days after a protest led by a Catholic church causing DRC security forces to shoot and kill at least 6 people. In Ethiopia, opposition leader Merera Gudina warns of unrest if the country's government does not negotiate with popular opposition parties. Finally, South Africa's Miss Universe returns home for the first time since being crowned in November.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Now, bitten by a poisonous snake? There's an app for that. Researchers at the Technical University of Denmark are developing a fast, portable method to correctly identify the species of snake responsible for human envenoming. The testing centrifuges are 3D printed and inexpensive to produce. If the diagnostic tool was rolled out in remote areas, it could be possible for a clinician to fast determine which antivenom is necessary for treatment. Now, the team has received interest from the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, and the Red Cross. Well, next up, you've probably heard about the perils of the plastic we can see in our oceans. But amongst this litter lies a virtually invisible threat. 51 trillion microbeads from beauty products are currently in our oceans. Found in hundreds of different products such as face washes and shower gels, they get ingested by marine life and can even enter the food chain. But now, a UK-wide ban on manufacturers making products which contain microbeads has finally come into force. Although manufacturing of microbeads products has been banned in the UK, they will not be removed from the shop shelves completely until July. Well, and finally, on the outskirts of Stockholm, a glimpse into the future of public transportation. Autopilot, a self-driving bus project spearheaded by operator Nobina, is set to be officially launched on Wednesday. It's claimed to be a first of its kind in Scandinavia. During the 6-month trial, it's hoped commuters will develop from testing the new technology to relying on the autonomous vehicles as a convenient transport method. Once things are for sure, it's not for anyone in rush. Nobina says the buses have been limited to a maximum speed of 20 kilometers per hour during the trial, and that's what's trending today. Now, those two-dimensional billboards that dot the landscapes of many cities around the world may soon be replaced with 3D holograms. Companies working on this technology say it will revolutionize the way businesses and brands talk to potential customers. Viewers Elizabeth Lee got a glimpse of advertising's future at the recent Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
These bright, slightly hypnotic holograms are drawing large crowds. If you haven't seen it yet, a 3D display may soon come to a store near you.
It's already replacing billboards, LED screens, LCD screens, because there hasn't been any revolution in displaying industry for decades.
A blade that emits light creates these holograms. Multiple blades can be synchronized for larger holograms.
As soon as this piece of hardware spins, you stop seeing the hardware and you start seeing a hologram. And the piece of hardware spins fast enough so the human eye does not see any rotation and it sees the amazing holographic image.
With offices in London and Belarus, Kino Mo is not the only company with this programmable fan-like device. With a presence in the US and China, Holograph is another company developing this technology.
在不久的将来，大街小巷都会出现这种像科幻电影里面出现的这种全息广告的展示形式。
The applications for these 3D holograms include shopping centers, train stations, and restaurants. For franchises, such as fast food restaurants that want these displays in more than one location,
they have the capability to manage multiple devices around the world from a central location.
The cost of a blade, anywhere from around $1,000 to just over $3,000, depending on the manufacturer. And for the outdoors,
我们可以把它做得非常的防水、防风，以及各种恶劣的环境都可以克服。
So two-dimensional billboards like these may soon be replaced by these 3D holograms. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News, Las Vegas.
And that's our show for today. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Today's episode won't cost you anything.
Freebie.
Let's see what this one is about.
Anna, I love my job.
Oh yeah? Why is that?
I get so many freebies from the bands I write about. CDs, t-shirts, water bottles, even tickets to see them perform.
Wow. The only freebie I ever got from my